Myers.
Thank you, Mayor. The City Council is aware staff is reviewing new strategies to manage unfunded liabilities for both pension and OPEB. That was prompted by more conservative assumptions that are being implemented by MERS. As part of that process, staff met with MERS earlier this month. It was a very good meeting, and I also thought it would be beneficial to have them make a presentation to the City Council, give you an overview of the program, talk a little bit about our situation, and then give you an opportunity to ask them questions directly. So with that, we have two representatives from MERS, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Okay. Well, thank you, Council. My name is Mike Overly. I'm a regional manager with MERS, so I work in the West Michigan area with more than 200 communities, helping them understand their MERS benefit and just sort of walking them through that process and helping them deal with the challenges that they face as a municipality. With me today is, well, I'll actually let her do her own introduction. I'm sorry.
Wow, thank you. Good evening. My name is Erin Wortman. I'm the Customer Relations Director at MERS, so I oversee our regional teams, so Mike's counterparts across the state, so from the Upper Peninsula to Southwest, Southeast Michigan, and so on. So I oversee a lot of the outreach and customer service and education, whether it be to boards, employers, or even to the individual employee groups. We have people part of our teams that do that type of education as well. So thank you for inviting us and having us here.
Quick question. I do have the presentation that we could put up there if you would like us to. Is there a
Their handouts as
preference?
well.
And I've got the handout.
Yeah, I think it'd be a benefit just for.
Would that be okay?
Everyone
Okay.
that's here.
And then should I stand over here tonight because I don't want to I don't want to block it. I'll jump in. I want to be respectful of your time. I know it looks like a lot, but it isn't that bad, I promise. So Erin's gonna load this up, and I'm gonna jump right in. So, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Myers, thank you again, and to Council for having us out there tonight. I appreciate it. You should have a copy of this in front of you. If you don't, I have some copies over there on the side. So I want to begin on the page just about MERS quickly for the folks that aren't familiar with MERS. MERS is the Municipal Employees Retirement System of Michigan. We've been around for 70 years. This is our 70th year of existence. MERS is an independent professional retirement services company dedicated solely to administering retirement benefits on the behalf of Michigan municipalities and other types of benefits, but focused solely on Michigan municipalities and doing all of that on a non-for-profit basis. So MERS is large. Again, we only focus in Michigan. We have 84% of the municipalities, so townships, road commissions, counties, libraries, cities, things like that. All of those entities are a part of the MERS system, whether they have hundreds of employees or 1 or 2 employees. So lots of participants, over 100,000 participants, and in terms of sheer size, in terms of dollars, we actually invest more than $9 billion in terms of our total portfolio that we administer on behalf of all of the members in MERS. And there are over 800 individual municipalities in the MERS system. Moving to the next page, a key element with MERS, I want to mention it says a program for every need. MERS 70 years ago was started just as a defined benefit plan administrator. So what we call the traditional pension, if you will. As the needs of Michigan municipalities have evolved, local control is unique to the state of Michigan. Communities can decide what type of plan they want to offer, whether it be a 401k type plan, a defined benefit plan, combination type plan. Each community decides what they want to do. So as those needs increase, MERS has really evolved to meet the needs of those municipalities as well. So the wheel there that you see on that page represents the growing MERS portfolio of offerings, if you will, which includes defined benefit, but also defined contribution, deferred comp plans, and other programs designed to help communities deal with other challenges that they might be facing in terms of maybe challenges with OPEB or things of that nature. So MERS has continued to grow. I should mention, 70 years ago, MERS was a part of the state of Michigan. 20 years ago, we separated from the state of Michigan. So again, we're an independent retirement services company today. So we are subject to the rules and regulation, oversight of the legislature, but we are no longer a part of the state of Michigan. Moving to the next page, to add to what I just said there, MERS is governed by an elected board. It's a 9-member board. Board members are voted upon and seated at our annual conference, which takes place every year. It's an annual conference. And I think it's a very good governance model. From the standpoint, we consider a lot of different perspectives. So not to get into all the details here, but we consider administrative perspectives. So from an employer type standpoint, we consider an employee standpoint. We also consider the retiree standpoint. And then we also have 2 appointed members on the board who are outside investment professionals. So someone from the private sector who has a lot of experience with investments, and they're on our board as well to provide that private sector experience as well as particular expertise in the investment realm. The key piece with our board, the little star there in the middle of the page, Aaron's got it up, thank you Aaron, I appreciate it, is the MERS board does take what we call the fiduciary responsibility of the plan. So what does that mean? Basically, we're the caretaker of the plan. We have the responsibility for oversight of the plan, making sure the investments are invested appropriately, that promises can be fulfilled by the communities that are in MERS, making sure that employees that are in the plans, regardless of what type of plan they're in, can understand the benefit that they have. So we're really charged with making sure the system is in good hands and helping everybody understand it and making sure benefits can be fulfilled. So moving to the next page here. So the city of Norton Shores actually joined MERS in 1965. So it's been a while. And one of the reasons, again, that the city joined, and really the reason that a lot of communities have joined MERS throughout its history of the 70 years, is we really do things well that you normally wouldn't probably be able to do on your own. So think of MERS as really strong in terms of economies of scale. So individual community, it'd be difficult, honestly, to offer a defined benefit plan, to administer a defined benefit plan. You come to MERS because that's what MERS does well and focused only, again, on Michigan. So everything that MERS brings to the table, investment expertise, legal expertise, legislative expertise, customer service expertise, all of those things, you're then saying, hey, MERS, do this for us because that's what you do, because everybody in the room knows as local officials, you guys have a lot of other things that you have to deal with and challenges that you deal with every day. So that's why a lot of teams will come to MERS. And at the end of the day, when I mentioned economies of scale, City of Norton Shores money gets pooled together for investment purposes with City of Muskegon Heights, Muskegon County, City of Muskegon, and all of the other communities in the area, so that when our investment managers go to market, they can achieve significant economies of scale that they wouldn't otherwise normally be able to do. So strength in numbers, a $9 billion portfolio, gives you a lot of clout in the investment market. So moving to the next page, when we talk about you're partnering with MERS to be your pension plan administrator, of course there's going to be costs or fees, if you want to call it that, associated with running the plan. And so there's 2 comparisons or 2 distinctions that I really want to make. So when we talk about administering the plan, the legal work, the legislative work, the actuarial work, the customer service work, our website, things like that, then there's our investment managers. And MERS pools, again, everything from an investment standpoint, but our costs are shown here on the screen, and they're very, very low. So this is the benefit, really, of pooling for all municipalities in the state of Michigan. You can see in the last 5 years, the cost of doing business with MERS has actually declined by 32% since 2011. Now the cost of doing business with MERS is then different than the next slide page, which are plan costs. Plan costs, again, are what makes the City of Norton Shores plan unique. So the provisions of your plan, what makes your plan distinct from, say, the City of Muskegon. So those costs are determined by the people in the plan and some things that we'll talk about later. So very different plan costs versus the cost of doing business with MERS. And we'll get into that a little bit more. This slide I probably should have put up earlier, but everything on the right-hand side there is sort of all what's rolled into MERS administrative costs listed there on the right. So, all right, I'll keep moving here, keep up with time. So next page. This really gets to the bottom line of why we do what we do, why municipalities join the MERS system really in the first place, our investment expertise. Again, we've got 70 years of experience. When we pool our assets together, honestly, we can do great things. So when we do this, we can do a lot, and the returns that you're looking at here over a 35-year period is 9.43%. So we're institutional investors. It's a defined benefit plan. It's a working career type plan. We're investing for the long term in a very well diversified portfolio. And the nice thing, if you're looking at it, I think you can see the colors a little bit better in your handout if you have it. So what we're looking at here is that smooth arc that you see there, the blue section. That represents the growth of $10,000 if you started investing back in October, and what that looked like if it just grew at 7.75% a year. Then the green spiky lines, if you will, above that represents what the MERS portfolio has done over that same time frame. And so you can see a significant difference there in the growth, really from having those institutional investors and investing from the long term. So it's something that we're very proud of, and a lot of folks are coming to us for that expertise and knowledge. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into how the defined benefit plan works. So the benefit that the city of Norton Shores has is broken down into different classifications or groups of employees, depending on the job that you do for the city. And each community that's in MERS can offer a completely different benefit structure. So what that benefit looks like is always going to be based on three pieces, what we call the defined benefit portfolio. So quickly, there's three things that we look at when determining what is any individual's benefit. So we look at what we call final average compensation. That's just like the wages that we're going to base your pension on. Your service credit, so that's months and years of service that you work for a community. And then a benefit multiplier. And benefit multipliers in the MERS system vary anywhere from 1% to about 2.5%. We literally multiply those together, so that's the secret formula. You multiply those together, and you come up with an annual benefit. So for an example, quickly, of what that looks like, possibly for a person, say a person paid $50,000, they work 25 years, and they have a 2.25% multiplier, literally multiply those out, and that would result in an annual benefit of a little bit more than $28,000 for that particular person. So very straightforward from the participant's standpoint. Okay, now this benefit to them is, as I referred to in the beginning, it's a lifetime pension benefit. It's the traditional pension. So regardless of what happens in the investment market, from the participant standpoint, the individual who has this plan, their benefit is always going to be based on that three-part formula that we just talked about, not subject to investment market fluctuations and things of that nature. It's solely based on that three-part formula. Key thing to think about in the state of Michigan is that the state constitution protects what employees have earned through today in their defined benefit plan. So public sector employees, the constitution protects everything that was earned up through today. But the big distinction is that it's a lifetime benefit for as long as you are alive, however long that may be. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. Honestly, from an individual standpoint, you know that you have the three-part formula, and you can pretty much calculate where you are in terms of a benefit that you might receive from this type of plan as a participant. But let's take a look at it from another perspective. Let's take a look at it from the city's standpoint. So we're promising this lifetime benefit. So how do we really know how much money to get into this plan so that we can ensure that when our employees retire from the city of Norton Shores, that there's going to be money there to pay for them, and they have this lifetime benefit for as long as that they are alive. So a key piece here is in the state constitution also requires that defined benefit plans are what we call pre-funded. So pre-funded means setting aside money today for future payments of retiree benefits. So generally speaking, there's going to be three different sources for where the money comes from. It's going to come from the city, or the employer, as the slide shows. It's going to come from the employees, so contributions out of their paychecks to fund these plans. And then the third piece is it's going to come from investment earnings. And again, I touched base on a little bit on that earlier with our long-term rate of return and things like that. But employee, employer, and investment earnings are the three funding sources for the defined benefit plan when an individual goes to draw. Now, I mentioned earlier that pooling of assets from an investment standpoint is really one of the things that makes MERS unique and allows us to do some things very effectively. At the same time, each municipality that's in MERS, whether you're a township, city, county, or village, each municipality is held into its own separate trust. So what does that mean, Mike? That basically means that the promises or the liabilities of the city of Norton Shores is held exclusively separate, say, from the promises of the city of North Muskegon or the city of Muskegon. So there's no blending of funds or borrowing of funds from one community to another to help one community meet their obligations. So everybody has their own set of obligations or liabilities, and everybody has their own set of assets as well. So we pool or mingle our assets for investment purposes, but at the end of the day, the liabilities are unique to every community that is in the MERS system. I mentioned earlier that the three sources were employee contributions, city contributions, and investment earnings. And when we look at the entire MERS system across the state, investment earnings just by themselves typically contribute at least half of the benefit that an employee will receive in retirement. So investment earnings is obviously a critical component to the whole thing. So how is it that our actuaries do what they do? And preface here, I am not an actuary. I will never be an actuary. I don't play one at MERS or on TV, so you'll never see any of those things happening. So this is our best attempt to try to boil down what is it the actuaries do without actually being actuaries. So when we go to determine for the city of Norton Shores, hey, how much money do we need to put into this plan to fulfill this lifetime benefit for its employees, we're looking at a number of things. We're looking at, hey, how much money has already been put into the plan? Who are the people that are in the plan? You know, male, female, they're different ages. What's the demographic makeup of that plan? And what are the benefits that they have? So the multiplier, what makes their plan unique? How long do they have to work to be vested? Things like that. They take a look at all those things, and then they say, all right, we're going to apply a whole series of assumptions to those figures that we just looked at. So assumptions are things like, how long do we expect people to live? What do we expect the investment market to return? What's inflation look like? What's the probability that someone who might be working for the city might become disabled while he or she is working? What's the probability that when someone's eligible to retire, he or she is actually going to retire on day one? Some people will, some people won't. So high level, again, there's a whole series of assumptions that we make, and we say, if this group of people has this set of plans, and we've already paid in this much money, and all of these assumptions are accurate, then this is how much money that we need to have into the plan, and this is how much money we need to have contributed to the plan this year in order to fulfill the retirement benefit. And this all goes back to the fiduciary responsibility that I mentioned in the beginning. And so what we provide to every community every year, the city included, is what we call an annual report. And the annual report summarizes a whole bunch of data for the city in the past year, and it also tells what are the annual contributions. So how much money do we need to pay this year towards fulfilling that obligation? So when we get the report, costs are broken up into two different areas. And I'll just leave it quickly that there's a year-to-year cost of the plan that we call a normal cost, or the blue box. And then if the plan is underfunded, which we'll talk about in just a second, there's also the green box, or an additional payment, which is designed to pay down any unfunded liabilities that exist over a fixed period of time. And we add those two together, and that derives the total employer contribution or the total city contribution. So let's talk a little bit more about unfunded liability. I just mentioned, there's that green box. So let's talk about that a little bit more. When you think about a defined benefit plan, again, the employee comes to work for the city, they work a certain number of years, they become vested in the plan. The city is making a promise to that employee that says, if you do this, we're going to give you this lifetime benefit. That lifetime benefit represents a liability, promise or a liability for the city, and then obviously to fulfill that liability, we need to have assets to pay for that. So I like the scale analogy that you see there on the screen or in your packet. Think of the benefits and the liability on one side, the assets on another, and if a defined benefit plan is fully funded or 100% funded, the scales are level, we're in balance, and that's where ultimately all plans will be that are in the MERS system. We have to get them to a fully funded position so that promised benefits can be paid over the long term. So I just mentioned we're going to talk about unfunded liability. So what is unfunded liability? Well, the easy answer here is when the scales are not in balance. So basically the liabilities or the promises weigh more or outweigh the assets in the plan. So there's a gap between the assets and the liabilities. And the gap can come from any number of areas, and you see that on the screen or in your packet there. They can be derived from benefit changes or assumptions not being met, folks living longer than what we expected. There's a variety of different ways that unfunded liability can result, but suffice it to say, at the end of the day, it's just a difference between the promise and the money that's set aside for the promise at any given point in time. Just a little bit more on that, and I won't go through all of these, but this is a little bit more detail as far as why do unfunded liabilities occur. And one of the biggest reasons is if the assumptions that are in place are not exactly met by reality, then an unfunded liability can occur. And in defined benefit plans, the costs are going to ebb and flow every year because we're making assumptions, but we really honestly don't know how much an individual is going to draw in a defined benefit plan. We really don't know what the true cost of a defined benefit plan is, honestly, until that person passes away. Then we know, well, that person lived this long and they drew this much of a benefit, and then and only then do we know how much what was paid out to this person. So these are all of the reasons. You can go across the state of Michigan, you can go across the United States and see examples of all of these things happening, and what brings a specific community to where they are at this particular point in time. Okay, so if you do have an unfunded liability, and the city of Norton Shores does have an unfunded liability, then going back to MERS fiduciary responsibility, we have to ensure that over time, that benefit can be paid in full, so that the liability is met, if you will, by an equivalent level of assets. And we have to pay that off, not today, not tomorrow, not 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, but over a longer period of time. But it is a fixed time frame, and that fixed time frame is something that we call the amortization period. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. So I'm going to give you a little bit more detail about the specific plan that you offer here at the city. So in the 2015 annual valuation report, that's that summary report that I said MERS does for every community every single year. It gives them a lot of detail about their plan. We provide that to every community. Again, it's a part of that fiduciary responsibility to ensure that everybody is making adequate progress over time towards fulfilling that obligation. On top of that, one of the questions you might be asking yourself, if you say, okay, Mike, you said the benefits based on this group of employees and these benefit provisions, but then out here you have all of these assumptions. So how do we know, and it's definitely a question that I get asked a lot in my travels, how do we know if the assumptions that we're using to determine these rates are accurate? So as a part of this fiduciary responsibility, every 5 years, the MERS board, our senior management, our actuaries go through this process that we call an experience study. The experience study at the most basic level says, hey, what are our assumptions, and what does the data look like for the last 5 years? So here's assumption A, here's the data for the last 5 years. Sole purpose being, is the assumption in line with reality? If it's not, do we need to tweak it? And we don't want to overreact, but we don't want to underreact as well. So we go through line by line every single assumption and take a look at them. And again, this all goes back to state law requiring pre-funding and making sure that the benefit can be fulfilled over time. So we're looking at all these assumptions as a part of the experience study. And this year, at the most recent experience study, as Mr. Myers had mentioned in the beginning, MERS did change some of its assumptions, which then do have a direct impact on every defined benefit plan that is in the MERS system. The impact will vary based on the uniqueness of every community that is in MERS. And the last bullet point there just mentions, based on that impact, sometimes it was substantial, sometimes it wasn't as much, but if it was more substantial, then our board gave an option to phase in or sort of spread out that impact, if you will, over a longer period of time. I won't get into too much more detail here in the interest of time, but you're probably asking yourself, okay, you did this experience study, you said you changed some stuff. What is that stuff that you guys changed? So here's the big three. The first is we changed our investment rate assumption. We lowered it slightly from an 8% assumption down to a 7.75% assumption. That probably doesn't sound like a lot, and you could say, no, 0.25%. But it's still impactful. And what does this mean? Even a 0.25% decrease? When we talk about where does the money come from in a defined benefit plan, you have the employee contribution, the employer contribution, and investments. So if we're anticipating even a little bit less coming from investments, then that's going to shift the responsibility. What isn't covered by investments is either going to become the responsibility of employees or of the city. So the board was very cognizant of saying, you know, we don't want to adjust that too far. At the same time, in the beginning, I mentioned our long-term rate of return is 9.43%. So it's a volatile investment market right now. There has been, you know, there's been ups and downs, and the Federal Reserve has some policies that are sort of keeping interest rates artificially low. That being said, for institutional investors investing over the long term, and we really have a high degree of confidence that we'll be able to achieve the 7.75 on a long-term basis. So that's number one. Number two is mortality tables were adjusted. Translated, that basically means people are living longer. That's probably not a surprise to anyone in the room. We see that happening on a local level and a national level as well. But if you're talking a lifetime benefit, and you're talking about active employees living longer once they get to retirement, as well as existing retirees living longer in retirement, if you're promising a lifetime benefit, that's going to need to have more money put into the plan in order to fulfill that obligation to them to provide that lifetime benefit. So that's number two. And then number three, for purposes of this discussion, I'll just say we've changed the amortization period that I just talked about, so it's a fixed period of time. The fixed period of time basically means that I can definitively say that there's a certain point in time in the future at which the city of Norton Shores will pay off all of its legacy unfunded liability. So, and that is a change from the past, that now it's a finite fixed period over which those obligations will be paid. Okay, so give you a little bit more detail here quickly as far as specifics. Again, when our actuaries do their thing, you can see the four things that we're looking at as far as the city's specific data. Bottom line, at the end of 2015, December 31st, 2015, the funded level or the ratio of the assets to the liabilities for the city was 47%. And we've talked about funded level a lot, so I won't talk about that anymore. In terms of contributions, this is the other key information that's reported in your annual evaluation. We talked about normal costs, we talked about the green box, the additional contribution. So add those two up and there's the total citywide contribution that will be effective beginning on January 1 of 2017. So again, this is very high level in the report. As you've probably already seen, there's a lot more detail by division, individual employee classification, but I at least wanted to give you a few high level takeaways as far as what that report shows and where the city is at right now. Another piece I just wanted to focus on, this is a table that I directly took from the annual valuation report. This shows sort of money in, money out, if you will, over the last 10 years. So if you look at the bottom there, table 5, you can see the money that the city contributed under required contributions. You can see what employees contributed. You can see investment income and how substantial that is. You can see benefit payments. So that's the money going out. That's money going out to former employees of the city who are now retired or their beneficiaries. So it just gives you a feel for what's going on with this plan and what's been going on with this plan in terms of the money coming in, the investment income, and the money coming out. The last piece that I really wanted to mention in the annual report, and if you haven't seen this in the discussion with Mr. Myers, you probably will be soon. Our report, we try to give you a lot of detail and data just to really empower the board and empower administration to say, hey, here's what's required, but we try to give you a lot of different scenarios, a lot of what-if scenarios, a lot of ability to say, well, what if this happens? Well, what if this happens? So it's the information that we provide to communities is designed to help them plan on a moving forward basis, including budget projections over the next 5 to 6 years. So there's a lot of data in there to help you really make an informed decision, not only about where you are today, but where you may be headed in the future as well. I really wanted to highlight that. The other piece that I wanted to mention, and also give kudos to the city, the middle bullet point there, it says, MERS does strongly encourage all members of MERS to make additional contributions above and beyond what they're minimally required to pay. So again, state law says you have to pre-fund your plan, and you have to pre-fund it at a minimum required level. So that being said, a great number of communities every single year now, including the city of Norton Shores, have recognized that there's a minimum level, but hey, they recognize that we have an obligation, we need to get that paid off. And the city has really taken that challenge and said we want to pay that off even faster. And so the city has been one of those communities that has paid even more in realizing that they have that obligation. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's a great approach, and the city has been doing that for a number of years. So my last really slide here that I just wanted to mention, I appreciate the opportunity to share this information with you here tonight. This has been an ongoing conversation, even prior to our meeting, earlier this month, and I just wanted to highlight some of the really positive actions that the city has taken already. And I missed money when I did my presentation here and put this together. The city's actually made over 1.5 million in additional contributions, and I put 1 million, so I wanted to clarify that. But that's a great approach because that pays down unfunded liability even sooner. That money gets invested, and it starts working for you sooner than later. Employees are paying more than what they were in the past that were in the defined benefit plan, so that's another great approach to just sort of help control costs. The city has also set up what we call different tiers or different classifications of defined benefit, and that actually started back in 2006. So at one point the plan level was here, and we said, well, the city's philosophy is we still want to offer defined benefit, but we're going to offer it maybe at a little bit lower level. A lower level brings with it a little bit lower cost as well, which has a reduction in liability overall. So that's an action that has sort of been ongoing and has been taken by the city over a decade ago. And then just the last point, actively involved in discussions with Mr. Myers and others regarding the consideration of a defined contribution plan, potentially for new hires as of a certain date in the future. So a lot of discussions taking place. A lot of discussions taking place at a lot of different communities, but again, what makes the state of Michigan unique is the local control aspect, that you have the ability to really decide what is the best for the current employees of the city of Norton Shores, as well as those folks that aren't even working for you yet. And I think that's a very powerful thing, and so I always appreciate the opportunity to be able to consult and partner with you in that regard. So that is everything I have. I hope I didn't blow my time limit way out of the water. I didn't get too many grimaces there. So, are there any questions that I can answer for the board?
Yeah, Councilmember, any question?
Mark, the only question I have, that AAV, have we ever had a copy of that? The annual valuation?
Well, typically, we review the annual audit, which we're going to review next month, which includes that information.
Well, no, I just wondering the way he talked with the AAV coming yearly. To be honest, in the 50 years, I don't even recall seeing. I'm just throwing that out, just to look at or read or know.
Mayor, just a couple questions.
Yeah.
So does the city, I understand since '06, our defined benefit has at a lower parameter, or whatever the term is, but do we have any employees that are hired now with a defined contributions versus a defined benefit, and can we not do that until we get this pension liability lowered?
It's a good question. So,
She's got the answer.
that might be the right answer.
Let's try a little bit. Yeah.
No, actually, in reality, I usually don't have a soundtrack to my speeches here or whatever. So, no, the answer, Commissioner, as of today, it's all defined benefit that you have here at the city. So there are no new employees, as of a certain date in the past, that are in a defined contribution plan. The second part of your question was, does the city have to fully pay the liabilities that we just talked about before it can implement that? And the answer is actually no. So in the not too distant past, and once upon a time there was a requirement to at least be funded at a certain threshold. And that threshold no longer exists. So the city council has the ability to explore and implement, ultimately, if they want to, a defined contribution type plan, irregardless of the funding status of this defined benefit plan. So it doesn't preclude the city from the obligation that's still here in the defined benefit
Sure.
plan, but it definitely gives you the green light, if you will.
And the reason why I asked that, one of the Mark's memos back in September talked about closing the defined, I always get these wrong, but the defined benefit plan, you know. So I was wondering if we had to get to a certain level. It sounds like maybe we don't. And I guess I would just say, as most of us are still in the working world, I mean, a defined contribution is, I mean, people hired at Consumers Energy since 2002 don't have a defined benefit anymore.
Let me add to that. So in 2006, we reduced the benefits of the defined benefit plan. The reason we did that is because we couldn't go to a defined contribution plan because our funding level wasn't high enough. At one time, MERS required 100% funding in order to close the DB plan and open a DC plan.
Okay.
So in 2010, at that point, you had to be 80% funded. And since 2010, you had to be 80% funded. So in that year, we put together a long-term plan to get to 80% so that we could consider closing the DB and opening a DC. So earlier this month, we met with MERS, and actually I had seen a similar presentation earlier in September, and that rule still applied. So what we learned earlier this month, with meeting with Mike, is that now there is no requirement. You can, no percentage funding level required. So that's key, because now we no longer need that long-term. We need a long-term plan. We're working on that. So what I'm asking council to do, what we need to do to consider closing the DB and opening the DC for new hires is actuarial study. And we're prepared to order that. Next month, staff is going to come forward with some additional strategies to deal with unfunded pension liability and also OPEB. But at this point, we've just learned 2 weeks ago that we now can consider a DC. So we would like to order that actuarial study so that that's now a possibility. But I do want to make it clear that back in '06, if we could have done it, we would have considered doing it. At that point, all we could consider was reducing the benefits of the DB plan, which we did, and that helped. But now we can make this next step, and this will be significant.
By going with a defined contribution, does that not become a long-term liability for the city? I mean, do you have to put that money into the budget every year? I'm not quite sure how that works from an accounting standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, so the city of Walker, for example, closed theirs about 10 years ago, and they're about 50% funded, low 50s, because you don't have that new money coming in from new hires. So it's not a panacea, and that's why you have to do an actuarial study to really see what it will do and how to fund it going forward.
Because one of the solutions could be maybe we continue to lower the defined benefit, and you keep that because then you still have the employer contributions, but the city's not putting in as much. And I understand you lowered that in '06. Maybe we look at lowering.
Yeah, like I said, we're going to come to council with some new strategies because there isn't any one thing that can be done to solve the issue. You have to attack it from a number of different angles. And the plan is at the November work session. We'll also have the audit presentation, so that'll be timely. And then we'll talk about specific strategies, some additional strategies above and beyond, what we've done today. But at this point, I'm looking for direction from the council to go ahead with the actuarial study.
What's a rough cost for something like that, Mark?
Refer to Anthony. You've been speaking with MERS. Do we have a overall cost? I think it's about $5,000, something like
If we were to do every division, it would be that amount.
Yeah.
It was 700 for the initial, and then every division's an additional 500.
We have a number of divisions because we have a tiered system. So, but unless council has any concern with that, we'd like to go ahead with that. Actually,
Seems like it's data that we need to make
absolutely.
decisions.
Yeah.
Concerns.
Okay, good.
The benefit payment column, does that include healthcare spend, or is that something separate?
Oh, and that table 5 that I showed, that's solely pension payments.
This is solely pension,
Solely pension.
not retiree health insurance.
Could I just ask a question? Because his point is important, because the elephant in the financial books, at least in this instance, is the unfunded OPEB, the retiree health benefits, which are twice the unfunded size as the pension. I know that you use different actuarial assumptions and things of that sort, but two questions. Is MERS handling that? And are the requirements to bring that up to speed, because it's currently 4% funded, which is, I believe, the lowest in the state in terms of that kind of a fund. What does MERS say about that kind of really gross $40 million to $38 million of underfunding?
Yeah, no, Mr. Mayor, is that our right to
Sure, go ahead.
address that? Yeah, so the pension piece, I'll get to the roundabout way. So the pension plans, you think pension plans have been around for years and years and years. OPEB plans are a little different from the standpoint that there has never been a requirement to pre-fund, so what we talked about. So, we talked about the funding level that we're at, but, the city has been paying into its defined benefit pension plan since 1965. So nationwide, so this isn't just MERS, and no one's had to do that, for OPEB liabilities. And then on top of that, it really wasn't until the last, 4 to 5 years really that the federal government came out and said, hey, if you promise this benefit, that's great, but we want you to recognize the dollar amount. What is it that you're promising? And that's huge. So, even 4 or 5 years ago, as crazy as that may sound, it really wasn't on anybody's radar. So now it is, now it is. So for the city, MERS has a trust account, if you will, an investment trust account in which the city can place money into that and take advantage of MERS economies of scale. So we talked about the $9 billion that MERS invests. So the city has the ability to put money into that and grow assets towards meeting that obligation. But the big difference is unlike the pension, which is constitutionally protected, and MERS has the fiduciary responsibility of monitoring and making sure everyone's on a path. That does not exist for OPEB. So there is no, hey, you got to be this level of funded. And I agree with you that OPEB liabilities, when you look on a national level, they are large. They are large, and healthcare costs are variable, and they have gone up. So they're fundamentally different in terms of the requirements, and where they started. So, fast forward, or I guess not fast forward, fast forward, 30, 20, 30 years from now, as communities have recognized it and start making contributions to pre-fund that, very different situation, if that helps.
Might I,
Yeah.
just a true piece permission? With that too, so to Mike mentioning the trust that MERS has that many municipalities participate in and setting aside those OPEB dollars, assets now to fund, they're also coupling that with things that I'm sure this council will be looking with in regards to restructuring on a going forward basis and those types of things. And we've worked with municipalities across the state that have been doing this over on this side, back starting even in 2009 with the city of Grand Rapids and others around looking at ways and strategies. So we have case studies, we have examples of different approaches that different municipalities have taken in addressing it, as well as those that are utilizing our different types of retiree health savings accounts for the individual, going to more of that defined contribution style plan on the retiree healthcare side, coupling that with utilizing our investment pool to set aside those dollars that offset then when you do your OPEB actuarial valuation. So speaking of when you go to an actuary, you have them value those benefits, you have them value your funded level and all of those types of things. So it's more prevalent now to the piece because of GASB changes, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. Years ago, they had 45 out there where you had to start recognizing these liabilities and performing those actuarials, as Mike commented on, and now 75 is coming. It's piggybacking off from the pension changes from GASB 68 that's making them now be placed on balance sheets and recognizing an actual debt. And so it is an issue. The OPEB issue is larger than the pension, and municipalities have been taking steps to begin addressing those as well. And we do have resources for you if that's something you're interested in.
How do we handle a retiree that retires at 60 and then qualifies for Medicare at 65? Those employees, retirees come off the books, they come off the actuarial forecasting.
The city's plan works. I'm not
We, for post-65, they go on a Humana plan. And then that.
So we still cover them after 65?
Right, and then that dovetails with Medicare
For a supplement, that's,
for supplement.
that's a lot less expensive.
So does MERS administer our OPEB? I mean, are they investing our OPEB money as little as it is?
Correct.
There,
Yeah.
okay, all right.
Could I just ask one clarification? There seems to be maybe a misunderstanding, or perhaps on my behalf, but there's no necessity to close the current defined benefit plan, and if in fact you want to make new hires on a defined contribution. You could continue with the defined benefit plan and without reaching any level, and just say new hires will be on a defined contribution plan. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So
And that's been correct for some decades, probably,
So-
certainly some number of years.
Yeah, so what Mr. Myers was mentioning there earlier, in the past, without getting into all the details, there was a funding level requirement, meaning that your ratio of your assets to liabilities basically had to be at a certain level in order for you to be able to close that defined benefit plan. And when you did that, the folks that were in defined benefit, they stayed in defined benefit. They continued to work and accrue service in defined benefit. What would happen then is your next new hire of that employee classification would come into a defined contribution plan. So what has been removed in the not too distant past is that funding level requirement. So now it really just goes completely to a local decision, by the city council. Is this our philosophy towards retirement on a moving forward basis? And every community answers that question differently. Does that help?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any question?
Yeah.
Back to the pension.
Yeah.
On the three changes that you've done from the last experience study, the third one, the amortization, moved to a fixed period, are basically stating that at some point in the future, we have a fixed date that our unfunded liability is scheduled to be paid off.
Yeah. Yes.
What is that date?
Let's see, 23 years from now, whatever that year is,
43?
38, 39, I'm sorry. This
Okay.
this is basic math, that's why I'm not an actuary or a.
23 years works perfect.
Yeah.
So, between now and the next 23 years, if you take a look and the mortality table gets adjusted up again, and the investments get adjusted down again, and the stock market takes a dump, are you going to send us a bill for 1 year for some ungodly amount because that amortization period cannot be moved anymore?
Yeah, great question, great question. So that was actually something that, as part of this experience study, our board looked at that and they're like, what if that happens? Because that's very real, that could happen. So not to get into too much of the weeds here, but I'll say the board anticipated that, considered that, and as a part of the process, they've implemented what we called a tiered amortization policy, knowing that things could get quite volatile when that number gets down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So when I mentioned in the beginning, I was very specific in mentioning that the legacy unfunded liability, the lumber that's on the books for the city right now, will be paid off, but there's always going to be fluctuations. Some year we might have good experience, have no unfunded liability, and some years, the market is going to be volatile. It's going to be up and down. It's going to fluctuate. So in some years, we might have unfunded liability show up. So moving forward, and this isn't anything that's happening today or even tomorrow or even the next couple of years, but in the future, as this plan is implemented, as the time frame shrinks down and we're paying off this legacy liability, at a point in time in the future, we're going to begin to look at the individual experience from any one given year and then independently amortize that year over a 15-year time frame. The sole purpose of that is if you have bad experience, for whatever reason that occurs, you don't get stuck with a bill that could be unmanageable, honestly, in 1 year. So we're dealing with the legacy, paying that off, and then in the future, about 8 years out, we'll start looking at each year independently, good experience or negative experience, and then dealing with those individually as well. So that's why I mentioned the legacy. It's hard to explain. We've got some graphs, and there'll be much more, honestly, coming out that. So I'll be glad to share with you more. I don't mean to try to confuse you. I probably confused myself when I said that there. But I can at least say that that's definitely been considered and thought out, and realizing that that can be very real. And so how do we mitigate that in terms of the policies and procedures that we have in place?
Hopefully a quick question. On one of the slides, you mentioned from page 15, the AAV, the city now pays $2.2 million a year. So are we, Mark, I know you've told us that we're paying an additional $500,000 the last couple of years. So are we paying $500,000 on top of the 2.2 million?
Yes,
Okay.
above the ARC.
Above what is
annual
required.
contribution, or what Mike referred to as the minimum.
And that minimum takes into account that we have an unfunded liability, so we're paying more than, okay.
Correct.
All right,
Yeah,
thanks.
so ultimately, over time, that green box will go away over time.
Over time.
Yeah, and you're sort of expediting that process by doing the additional $500,000 per year for the last couple of years.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you both for coming.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Appreciate
it.
Next, move on to item number 3. This is the Black Lake Park Phase 2 Master Plan. Mr. Myers.